The gymnasium of the Joint Base. Naval Amphibious Base in Little Creek was a cathedral of sweat and iron. The air was thick with the smell of chalk, rubber, and decades of hard effort. On this particular Tuesday morning, the space was packed to the rafters. Over 100 sailors, soldiers, and Marines were gathered, forming a tight ring around the central wrestling mat. The annual Combatives exhibition was underway, a tradition where different units put forth their best fighters to prove their mettle. It was a day for building esprit de corps, but beneath the camaraderie ran a fierce current of competition. At the center of the mat stood Lieutenant Commander Jason Jace Kincaid. He was the very image of a Navy SEAL commander, 6'3" with a granite jaw, shoulders like boulders, and a chest that looked like it could stop small arms fire. His record was the stuff of legend: multiple combat deployments, a Bronze Star with valor, and 3 consecutive years as the unarmed combat champion of this very exhibition. He moved with the coiled grace of a predator, and as he looked around at the crowd, a confident smirk played on his lips. He was in his element. Across from him, standing quietly in a standard-issue PT uniform, was Chief Petty Officer Lena Vance. She was of average height, with a lean, wiry build that was often mistaken for slightness. While the other SEALs on her team were built like NFL linebackers, Lena looked more like a marathon runner. Her face was calm, almost serene, framed by short, dark hair. She didn't bounce on her toes or flex. She simply waited. The crowd's murmur was a low hum of anticipation. Most of them were here to see Jace. They wanted to see the commander dismantle another opponent. The fact that his opponent was a woman, and from his own unit no less, had made the prospect even more intriguing to some and uncomfortable to others. The murmurs were pointed. "Vance? She's a hell of a logistics chief, best I've ever seen, but against Kincaid?" A gunnery sergeant from the Marines whispered to his buddy. "It's like putting a Ferrari up against an Abrams tank," his friend chuckled back. "It'll be over in 30 seconds. He'll probably just pin her gently to save her the embarrassment." Lena heard the whispers. She heard the dismissive tone, the condescending laughter. She had heard it her entire career. As one of the few women in naval special warfare, she was used to being underestimated. She was used to people seeing her size and assuming she lacked the grit, the strength, the sheer brutality the job required. What they didn't see were the 4 a.m. workouts before anyone else woke up. They didn't see the hours she spent drilling jujitsu techniques, not just to learn them, but to perfect them with a mathematician's precision. They didn't see the quiet burning fire that had carried her through BUD/S, through a command that still wasn't entirely sure what to do with her. The referee, a master chief with a clipboard, called them to the center. "All right, you two. Standard pancration rules. No eye gouging, no throat strikes. Tap out or the ref calls it. Got it?" Jace offered a large, calloused hand. Lena took it. His grip was crushing, a deliberate display of power meant to intimidate. "Don't worry, Chief," he said, a gaze without flinching. Her eyes were a gaze without flinching. Her eyes were a flat, calm gray, like the surface of the North Atlantic before a storm. She didn't respond with words. She just gave a slight nod and released his hand. The Master Chief blew his whistle. Jace immediately exploded into action as everyone expected. He shot forward, a human battering ram. He aiming to clinch and use his immense upper body strength to toss her to the mat. It was his signature move: overpower, overwhelm, finish. It had worked on dozens of opponents. But Lena wasn't there. She moved like water, flowing to the side as his bull rush carried him past. He stumbled, momentarily off balance, and the crowd let out a collective gasp. He recovered instantly, spinning around, his smirk replaced by a look of slight surprise. "Lucky duck," he muttered, resetting his stance. But he came again, this time more cautiously. He threw a heavy-handed punch, a feint to get her to cover up so he could shoot in for a takedown. Lena read it perfectly. Instead of backing away, she stepped into the punch, deflecting it with her forearm while simultaneously dropping her level. She wrapped her arms around one of his legs in a perfectly executed single-leg takedown. Jace felt his foot leave the ground, and his world tilted. He crashed onto the mat with a thunderous boom that vibrated through the floor. The silence in the gym was absolute. No one had ever taken Jace Kincaid down. No one. He was on his back for only a second, pure shock on his face before his training kicked in. He bucked and thrashed, trying to use his brute strength to reverse their positions. Lena, now on top, was a dead weight. She wasn't trying to match his power. She was using leverage. Her shins dug into his thighs, her hips were low, and her base was unshakable. He felt like he was trying to tip over a pyramid. He managed to get to his knees, grunting with effort. He could feel the eyes of 100 soldiers on him, and the shame was a hot coal in his gut. This was not part of the plan. With a roar of frustration, he lunged forward, trying to drive her off and land on top of her. Lena let him. She used his own forward momentum against him, subtly shifting her weight. As he surged up, she fluidly moved, wrapping her legs around his torso in a triangle choke and simultaneously using her arm to trap one of his. In one seamless motion, she used his own drive to flip him onto his back again, landing squarely in the mount position. Now she was on top. Her knees clamped tight against his ribs, her weight centered perfectly on his solar plexus. Jace's eyes went wide. He was trapped. He was the most dangerous man in the room, and he was pinned beneath a woman he had promised to go easy on. That he tried to bridge, to throw her off with an explosive arch of his back. She absorbed the movement, staying glued to him. He tried to shrimp to the side, to create space. She flowed with him, maintaining her dominant position. Each desperate, powerful movement was met with calm, technical resistance. It was like watching a force of nature trying to move a mountain. The mountain didn't fight. It just stayed. From the sidelines, the disbelief was palpable. Jaws were hanging open, and the Marines who had bet on a 30-second victory were staring in stunned silence. The SEALs from Lena's own team were watching with a mixture of awe and dawning respect. They had trained with her, worked with her, but they had never seen this. They had never seen the quiet, efficient logistics chief transform into an immovable, inescapable object. On the mat, the reality of his situation was dawning on Jace. He couldn't muscle his way out. He couldn't outbrawl her from this position. A cold thread of panic began to weave its way through his combat-hardened mind. He was utterly, completely controlled. And then, he felt the pressure on his ribs begin to increase. Lena, maintaining her perfect mount, began to squeeze. It wasn't a wild, frantic squeeze. It was a slow, deliberate, systematic constriction. She used her powerful thighs and the grip of her knees, applying pressure that was both gentle and terrifyingly inexorable. It was the pressure of a constrictor, slowly and methodically cutting off the life of its prey. Jace tried to breathe, but his diaphragm was compressed. He tried to move, to find any give in her position, but there was none. The pressure built. A sharp, stabbing pain flared in his side as his ribs began to bend beyond their natural limit. It was a pain he knew well. He had broken ribs before. But he had never been on the receiving end. He had always been the one dishing it out. The crowd was dead silent now, for a tap. The tension was a physical for a tap. The tension was a physical presence in the room. Jace's face was turning red. He bucked again, a final, massive surge of power fueled by ego and desperation. It was useless. Lena just tightened her hold, her expression unchanged. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't smiling. She was just performing a task with absolute, chilling efficiency. She was showing them all exactly who she was. Another millimeter of compression. A sound like a dry stick snapping echoed in the silent gym. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. It was followed by a second, then a third. Jace's eyes flew wide, a choked cry of agony escaping his lips before he could stop it. He couldn't breathe, he couldn't move, and the pain was a blinding white light behind his eyes. The unbeatable SEAL commander. And of surrender. The Master Chief blew his of surrender, the Master Chief blew his whistle, the sound shrill in the stunned silence. Lena immediately released the pressure and smoothly dismounted, rising to her feet in one fluid motion. She stood over him for a moment, looking down at the crumpled form of the man who, just minutes ago, had promised to go easy on her. Where there was no triumph in her eyes, only the quiet satisfaction of a job done right. Jace lay on his back, one hand clutching his side, his chest heaving as he tried to draw air past his cracked ribs. He stared up at the ceiling, his face a mask of shock and shame. He had been utterly, comprehensively defeated. And not just defeated. He had been broken, in front of everyone. For a long, agonizing second, no one moved. The silence was so profound, you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. And then a single pair of hands started clapping. It was Lena's team leader, a senior chief who had watched the whole thing with a knowing smile. Then another person joined in, and another. Within seconds, the gym erupted in thunderous applause and cheers. They weren't cheering for Jace's defeat. They were cheering for the display of skill, of heart, of pure, unadulterated excellence they had just witnessed. They were cheering for Lena. Lena gave a short, humble nod to the crowd, and then extended a hand down to her vanquished opponent. Jace stared at her hand for a long moment, his pride warring with the searing pain in his ribs. Finally, with a wince, he reached up and grasped her forearm. She pulled him to his feet with surprising ease. He stood there, hunched over, unable to meet her eyes. "Good fight, Commander," Lena said, her voice calm and even. Jace just grunted, his face burning. He couldn't speak. The words were lodged in his throat, but along with the shattered pieces of his ego. Later that day, Lena was in the admin office, filing paperwork as if nothing had happened. The door opened, and in walked Master Chief O'Malley, the senior enlisted leader for the entire command. He was a grizzled veteran with 30 years of service and a face like a clenched fist. He walked over to her desk and leaned against it. "Heard you had a busy morning, Chief," he said, his voice gravelly. Lena looked up, her expression neutral. Just the exhibition, Master Chief." O'Malley grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes missing nothing. "You know, when you came to the teams, there were a lot of people who had their doubts, a lot of people who thought you'd be a liability, that you'd break under the pressure." Lena said nothing. She just waited. O'Malley nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile touching his weathered lips. "After today, I don't think you'll have that problem anymore. Jace Kincaid is a good man and a hell of a fighter. But he's also been an arrogant son of a bitch for the last 10 years. Maybe a few cracked ribs will give him a new perspective." He pushed off from the desk. "Good work, Chief. Dismissed." He was almost at the door when he turned back. "Oh, and Vance, the commanding officer wants to see you in his office tomorrow morning. Something about a new billet opening up for a lead combatives instructor. It seems he wants the best person for the job, regardless of what they look like." He winked and was gone. Lena watched him leave, a small, genuine smile finally appearing on her face. It wasn't about beating Jace. It was about this moment. The moment when all the whispers, all the doubts, all the assumptions were finally put to rest. She wasn't just a logistics chief anymore. She wasn't just the woman in the teams. She was Chief Petty Officer Lena Vance. Yet the person who had just crushed the ribs of an unbeatable SEAL commander in front of 100 soldiers. And for the first time, everyone in that room and in the